Good afternoon, New York City. Billy Joel said that Saturday night, and it worked for him, so I thought I would try it. I was dying to say that. So I am a neurosurgeon that has been studying inflammation for 30 years. And that's an unusual combination, which happened to me for two reasons. The first was a real tragedy. My mother died when I was 5 years old, very suddenly, of a brain tumor. And at the time, after her funeral, I didn't go to her funeral, but at the time afterwards, her father was a professor of pediatrics at Yale, and he was my grandfather, of course. And I remember talking to him many weeks later and asking him what happened. And he said, well, your mother had a tumor in her brain, and it was like a crab. And so as a 5-year-old, I had this horrible vision of this terrible thing in my mother's brain. And I said, well, why didn't the surgeon take it out? And my grandfather said, well, he could have taken out the body of the crab, but the legs of the crab would have spread throughout different parts of her brain, and if he had pulled those all out, she would have had tremendous damage. And I learned as a 5-year-old that how important the brain is to controlling how you feel, how you think, how you move, how you speak, how you hope, how you dream. And I said to him, someone should do something about that. And he said to me, I think you should. And so 22 years later, I was working at the New York hospital studying to be a brain surgeon with Russell Patterson, just not a few blocks from here. And the second thing happened. I met Janice. I met her 30 years ago last month. And she was 11 months old and had crawled across the kitchen floor while her grandmother was cooking spaghetti. And she crawled behind her grandmother's legs as the woman turned to drain the boiling water into the sink. And she stumbled and spilled the boiling water on her grandchild. And Janice's face wasn't burned, but the rest of her body was. She had scald wounds over 90% of her body. And it was a terrible injury, and it was a terrible tragedy, and I can't think of it without getting sad. She became very, very ill from sepsis. She had several bouts where she nearly died of shock from infection that came in through her now ineffective barriers because of her damaged skin. And believe it or not, she was getting better and was going to go home. And the day before she was supposed to go home, she was having a baby bottle in a nurse's arms, rocking in a rocking chair, and I was standing in the doorway. And Janice rolled her eyes back and died. And I was right there. And I ran in, and I took her in my arm, and I gave her CPR, and I gave her mouth-to-mouth, and we worked on her for a couple of hours, and she was gone. And as overwhelmingly sad as this was, it was even worse because I couldn't answer her parents' questions or her family's questions about what happened. Why did she go into shock? Well, bacterial toxins. Well, did you find any bacteria? No, we didn't find any bacteria. Well, did you find any toxins? No, we didn't find any toxins. Well, then why did she go into shock? Inflammation. And so at that point, in June of 1985, I rotated into the laboratory at Rockefeller with colleagues at Rockefeller and Cornell and began to study inflammation. And what I learned at the time, the dogma was that inflammation is a normal healing process which, if controlled, is very good for you, but it can spin out of control. And if inflammation becomes uncontrolled, as it did in Janice's case,